We're going to be reading and discussing various parts of Shmuel Aleph. And just to help us focus on the boundaries of the book, there are 3 episodes and 3 people that we'll try to look at in the time that we have. Shmuel, which you've all looked at a little bit already, and how he gets called to be a prophet. Shaul, King Saul, the first king of Israel, and then David, the second king of Israel, but really the first of the permanent dynasty of kings. Now, Shmuel Aleph, the book Shmuel Aleph, 1 Samuel, takes us from the call of Samuel through the career of Saul and up to the point where David becomes independent of Saul and really rules what becomes a dynasty. So David is included in 1 Samuel, but the early parts of his life, perhaps in many ways some of the most famous stories. But just so that you have a sense of, when you think of the books, you know what's in there. Think of 2 Samuel, which, hopefully will be done next time. Think of 2 Samuel as about David. So if you're looking for anything about most of the career of David, you look in 2 Samuel. If you're looking for things about the very early part of David's life, you look at the end of 1 Samuel. Okay. When we consider the name of the book, Shmuel, and the person Shmuel, we also see, and I'm mentioning this, you might have talked a little bit about it the last time, but it's part of the what I was asked to focus on today. You also see an important transition in terms of, I don't know if you want to call it leadership, spiritual focus, but basically what we find at the end of the Torah, beginning with the book of Joshua, is we find that the preeminent leader, although he is a kind of a prophet, he's largely a military person, one who is very much committed to the world of Moses, if you will. And then what we find in the book of Judges is a series of leaders who are, again, some of them might be considered prophets. One of them is certainly called a prophet, that's Deborah. And then you have somebody like Gideon, who seems to have a lot of prophet-like characteristics. But basically, taking all of the Shoftim, all of the judges together, they seem to be, roughly speaking, and only very roughly speaking, sort of warlords of a type of warlords. Now, with respect to Shmuel, we have a really different kind of person. Let's take a look at how Shmuel gets the call. You'll find that in chapter, let's see, I think it's chapter 3. Just take a look at chapter 3. If you find it first.
So not the page.
Yeah, if you find the page that's not the page in your book. In the brown books. Okay. So, would somebody just like to read from the beginning of chapter 3? Just tolerate my interruptions. Okay, guys.
Then Samuel was in the service of the Lord under Eli.
So Eli was the priest. He was the priest. He's considered to have been sort of the ruler of the people. Before Samuel, you could say he was a kind of a priest and judge, priest and shofet, but whatever. He was the head man.
In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. Prophecy was not widespread. One day, Eli was asleep in his usual place. His eyesight began to fail, and he could barely see. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. The Lord called out to Samuel and answered, I'm coming. He ran to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me? But he replied, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. So he went back and lay down. And then the Lord said, Samuel. Samuel rose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. But he replied, I didn't call my son, so go back to sleep. Now Samuel had not yet experienced the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he rose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. And Eli understood that the Lord was calling the boy.
Okay. So what feeling do you get from this story? And I remember the first time I read it, I had this, it really struck me. But how does it strike you?
That God sends us messages, and that we have to be aware that it's God rather than another human being or something else.
Now, you know that when there's a person who's become great, and Samuel became great, I mean, he was a prophet, basically was one of the Shoftim in his own way, was leader of the people. You could somebody, say that he was a kind of a proto-king, and he was also a kingmaker. He made two kings. So here's this great man, and now a story is told about him, from his youth. Focus on Samuel. What does it seem to tell us about Samuel? Right.
The reverse of that, which is what Samuel indicates, is the sensitivity to, in fact, having a relationship with God and being chosen. So the priest is on the way.
Does everybody agree with that?
I could say it shows Samuel was not as he's just a regular guy. He didn't feel others about him. He was respectful enough to realize if he's hearing something, he must be knowing him to think God's with him.
Now, as Nadine said, this seems clearly to show that God chooses whoever he will choose, right? And but Samuel was naive. He was, I won't say he wasn't ready for it, but he just didn't. He understood the temple. He understood, his relationship and his responsibility to the man that he worked for. Eli, it seems to me, actually does have more understanding at this point than Samuel does, because unless we didn't get to that verse. Maybe we didn't get to that verse, but there's a point where Eli says, "Oh, this must be God speaking to you."
Yeah, we just get that.
I misinterpreted. I heard it the third time. Eli still didn't get it, but that Samuel did.
No.
You were called again, say, speak, Lord,
Right.
for your servant is listening. Yes.
Now, compare this to any other call that we've had in the Torah in the whole Bible that we've studied. Don't go ahead, but go back. Okay, does this compare?
Isaac and
Isaac
what's his father's name? Jacob.
Well,
No,
Isaac's father is
Isaac.
Abraham.
Abraham. That's what I was thinking of.
Okay. What
The
exactly?
fact that he wanted he talked to Abraham in the first place, and that he was also asking him to do something to recognize it was he who was asking him to
Right.
sacrifice.
So there it would be a contrast.
Right.
Abraham knew full well all that was going on,
Mhm.
and even to the extent of being so confident about it that he was
Ready to
prepared
kill.
to slaughter his son, right? Sacrifice his son.
Moses.
How would it be like Moses?
Well, Moses didn't feel that he was ready for it. He didn't, he just didn't feel he was the person to do it.
Right. So there, Moses. Do you remember the story where he sees this bush,
Bush.
right? So he's not quite sure what it's all about, but it's a mysterious kind of thing. Doesn't seem to behave in the normal laws of nature, and it brings him closer. But then God does speak with him. Moses doesn't seem to reject the idea that that's God. He just has some problems about what God wants him to do, which is different than Abraham, and is so in some ways it may be similar to Samuel, right? But it's still, Samuel doesn't he seem more naive than even
Yeah.
Moses?
Oblivious to the possibility.
Sorry?
He's oblivious to the
Oblivious
possibility.
at first, yeah.
Samuel, to me, is somebody special because Hannah has prayed so hard for a child.
Right.
And
We know that because
Yes.
we've been reading the story.
Yes,
But
yes.
Samuel may not have
no,
the same
Samuel
understanding.
doesn't,
right?
but she may have, because she finally had the child, kept him sort of loved and enclosed.
Mhm.
And so his vision may have been, I'm not saying she didn't have goodness in mind, his vision may have been slightly
That is
different.
really interesting. That's really interesting because you would think that Hannah, who witnessed an angel of God visiting them, and believes that she can communicate with God silently, and she must have a lot of rather highly developed theology at this point. And it's amazing if she hasn't shared this with Samuel. I mean, it's amazing. I'm not saying, I'm not questioning that. I'm saying it's amazing, let's say, that she hasn't. He still maintains this kind of.
But
kind
didn't
of
she
innocence.
give him up after he was weaned?
See, that's the other
So that's
possibility.
very young.
She really brought him into the temple, and so maybe she didn't have so much influence on him.
I wonder if this,
I don't know.
episode.
It looks like he's rather young.
He sounds like a
sounds-
teenager.
sounds
sort
like
of to me, only because-
Okay, so anyway, this is the call of Samuel, and we have to touch on things in order to sort of get us through the first book, just because of the time limitations that we have here. But if you go ahead to the fact that Samuel becomes a prophet. He replaces Eli, essentially becomes Eli's successor, but brings in an entirely different moral tenor to the leadership of the temple and ultimately to Israel. We find in the book that a contrast is made very explicitly between Eli's sons and even Eli himself. Eli's sons, who you might expect, since Eli was the priest, would become the successors of Eli, but as a matter of fact, they are rejected by God because they're basically corrupt. And the passage describes some of the things they do. I just want to find that place to show you. I think that it's not too far away.
Eli's sons were scoundrels.
That's right. Yes, it comes before our points. That's right. So if you look, we won't read it together here, but in the middle of chapter 2, it's very explicit, as to what the problem was with Eli's sons. And the rabbis interpret it in order to show that they were actually violating the prescribed practices in the temple for their own venal benefit, and that so much so that even some of the people caught on, and rejected them because they saw how corrupt they were. So this is a case where actually Samuel has kind of a context which almost demands somebody like him. In any event, he becomes a popular and priest of integrity, and eventually has to deal with a kind of a complaint that the people have. We'll find that in chapter 8. Turn to chapter 8. Take a look now. I guess we could start at the beginning of the chapter. Would somebody read just several verses that will give us an idea?
When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and his second son was Abijah. They sat as judges in Israel. And his sons did not follow in the right. They were bent on gain, accepted bribes, and subverted justice.
Okay, so here's another man who, I'd like to think the best of Eli before him, but here's another man whose children don't seem to follow in his ways. The Torah, the prophet doesn't condemn Samuel for this, but the people see it. And the elders of Israel in verse 4 approach Samuel. Let's continue with that.
All the elders of Israel assembled and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, "You've grown old, and your sons have not followed the way. Therefore appoint a king for us to govern us like all the other nations." Samuel was displeased that they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord replied to Samuel, "Heed the command of the king, and everything I say to you. It is not that they have rejected. It is not you they have rejected, it is me that they have rejected as their king. And everything else they have done ever since I brought them out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and worshiping other gods, so they are doing to you. Lead their demand, but warn them solemnly, and tell them what the practices of the king are.
Okay, so what do you make of this?
One question which is, what's the lesson that the children of the men of integrity are not following in the sexual way? I mean, what's the insight into that? There's got to be a lesson.
There's got to be, yeah.
It's tough to raise good children.
Yeah.
Well,
He wasn't home a lot.
How many of you have ever heard of the expression preacher's kid?
Yeah.
PK, a preacher's kid. That there is a psychological or growing up in the limelight with a parent who is all that, right, is beloved or whatever. That there is.
They're gonna rebel and
And that it's not all genetic, right? That just because somebody is right so
Well, we
amazing,
don't know that
it's
it's
not
not
just
all genetic, because we don't know how genes mix. So that their propensity for corruption still could be genetic.
right. But what I'm saying is that just because your father or your mother
Doesn't
is
mean-
so
right.
amazing doesn't automatically make.
well, we know that.
That's quite a
What I'm saying-
reverse
What I'm
treatment.
asking is, what is the Torah, and what is the Torah implying about it? And you have someone who is a leader of all people, and yet, perhaps one of the messages is that even beyond having a strong leader, the Jewish people are supposed to integrate into their everyday social interactions and so forth. That is maybe the next step, because we did leave as slaves, and God is always saying, "You people, I took you out of the land of Egypt, and look what's happening. Even the leaders' children are corrupt."
I'm tempted, to draw some lesson from this, but there are too many other examples elsewhere in the Bible where things don't work out, this way. So I couldn't honestly say there's any one lesson that you could draw. I mean, in terms of experience, I'd say that very often people who are very successful out there, who spend a lot of time traveling around, don't derive benefit from their parents because their parents aren't there, to teach them.
And they're also sometimes angry.
Well, okay, that was the reactive aspect of it is something that Elise touched upon, and I just not adding to it, but
Right.
I mean, I certainly recognize the validity of that. I'm just giving another explanation. You know, because I know children of other rabbis who I think are not necessarily reacting, but, you know, just haven't had the benefit of their rabbinic fathers in terms of my generation, you know, being around very much. It's something in my own life that I actually, you know, modified what I was doing, not because my children were acting up, but, you know, when I saw that I wasn't going to be able to be with them a lot, I frankly, at that point, changed my career. You know, this went on for a number of years because I wanted to be able to spend more time with my children. And although I think it's one of the sad things about today's rabbinate, in my own particular case, I'm glad that I did it, you know, for my children's sake and my own peace of mind and you know, my needs to be a father. So anyway, so this is really a problem. This is a big issue. And I don't think I wouldn't go by what we see here as the only thing that Judaism says about it. But what I would see is this is one example of, and the Torah, I keep on saying the Torah, but you know, I mean, the Tanacha is very honest about it. And, you know, and okay, so we see it. But I think there's more other possible explanation, and that's, I wanted you to look at sort of the whole complex of what's going on here. Okay, so what do you think here? So here we have Samuel, good man, children are seen to be bad. People come and say, you know, we want a king. What do you make of that? What's the rationale here? Why couldn't they just have said, we don't want your children to be, you know, your successors, you know, find another person like you. Why suddenly do they say we want a king?
Well,
But
maybe
he's
they
not
invite.
He's not a king, right?
No.
He's a prophet.
Yeah.
Good question. How did they see him?
As a,
They thought of him as the leader.
A leader, but the leader
No, well, that's why
a
God
leader
said,
doesn't have to be a king, but a king is a
Apparently,
leader.
they didn't see him as whatever it is that they were asking
Yeah.
for.
Right.
Because they said, we want, appoint for us a blank to judge us like all the nations. So
Right,
that
exactly.
implies
That's
that
it.
we were missing something.
Right.
So what else is on their agenda here?
They want
To
to
be
be like
more like-
everybody
They want to be
Yeah.
like the other nations. Maybe whether it's because they saw, oh my God, we're going to have to put up with his sons, or whether it was just an opening to say, you know, we want something else. We're not satisfied with what's been going on. Which is interesting because if they had said this after all those other characters in the book of Shoftim,
Yes.
wow, fine, I can understand it. Here they've had a great shofet,
Yes.
and yet they still, you know, sort of,
They're not
well, from his point of view, they're turning against me. That's the way he understood it, you know, and God said to him, no, they're not turning against you, they're turning against me. What did God mean by that?
Well, I think that at this point in time, the Jewish people haven't had the opportunity to develop the concept of responsibility, their own responsibility toward God. Even though it's been said, well, you have a responsibility with God. You live the way God says, and you'll have a land of milk and honey for the rest of your lives. And they just keep turning aside
Right.
because they see other people. The fact that they want a king, they want to abdicate their own responsibilities toward God.
Okay, so you're seeing this as a kind of abdication of as an abdication of responsibility.
Absolutely.
That things so
But if God says that they're turning against me, so what's different between the people who are in other countries, communities that they see? So that goes to the essence of what's different about the Jewish people and what God has chosen the Jewish people to be a light to the nation. Now, maybe under the yoke of someone who is truly communicating that responsibility, but in a slightly different way, that the essence of really toeing the line and taking commandments, whatever, maybe they see the other communities certainly not doing that. So I don't know whether it's an assimilation issue or whether it is simply that they don't want to go get you.
I don't think the idea of there being a light unto the nations has really been developed yet.
Right. You know, there's an interesting book that I'm reading called by Jared Diamond, who talks about going from small groups to tribal and on to larger, where you need a leader because at that point it's too big to have the different tribes.
So maybe that could well be been the thinking of, you know, some of the more thoughtful people here that approached Samuel. Samuel didn't quite get it for some reason, for any number of reasons. But the writer represents God as getting it. It's interesting that according to tradition, Samuel wrote this part of the book. So, but that's a tradition which maybe
For me, does a prophet want to tell the people how they should be acting? But they say they don't want a king, it says here, at our head to fight our battles.
Right. You know, that
So
may
the
be
king
part of it.
tells
Right,
them,
right.
the prophet sort of gets them to try to do the right
Right.
thing.
And maybe that's, see, maybe, you know, in one way, you know, Samuel helped to bring about perhaps some peace. But on the other hand, maybe they were not feeling entirely comfortable with his message, whereas they weren't getting this message from most of the other Shoftim. You know, they just, you know, did everything that was right in their own eyes. Well, we don't have time to go into all the details, but the general impression that I think we're giving here is that he was somebody who was true to the Torah, that he was giving them true judgments, not crazy vows, you know, not sacrificing his daughter, not hanging out with, you know, sort of immoral people, like some of the judges did. All the judges were really not really an example of any consistent Torah-based culture, you might say. So presumably, not that the question isn't a good question, but it's not easy to answer, but it's more just sort of an impression that you get, you know, and the emphasis on Samuel being a prophet.
For centuries, Israelites lived as they would sacrifice and they didn't make waves. But then we see that all the nations, the kings and the palace and when there was war, all unite. So maybe we see it doesn't work. This unity, that's what I think, all the honor that the king used
I think also along that line, it may be that maybe Samuel's very success that brought the people to hear that another person like him in his role could not come along. And by having a king, somehow that would solidify their security, because they couldn't imagine his sons doing what he did. And the impression we get is that Samuel's success had to do with his connection with God, you know, with his being a prophet, that protected the nation. And possibly they didn't see that, you know, happening. I don't think that's unrealistic, because sometimes when there is a great leader, people then, you know, feel bereft at the end of that leader's career, because they know, quote unquote, that there won't be anybody like that again. Okay, so maybe there's some analogy, possibly there's some analogy to, depends on how they thought of him at that point. It's not that the exact, you know, equivalent. Also, we have the benefit of hindsight.
Right,
You know.
always.
Okay, we have to.
Just one quick thing to your question about God saying it's neither against.
Mhm.
it sounds to me like they're grappling with God's presence in their life. Like, if not all of us, most of us grapple all the time. Where is God? What is God doing? What role does he play? So I think
Yeah, that's the sort of the profound underlying problem here, that to the extent that Samuel represented not himself but God. Samuel, this isn't a rejection of you. Pay attention here. It's a rejection of me. But this is the way the people are. Now, what I'm saying now is only my speculation. This is the way people are. So God says, do what they want to do. Now, what's God's general, what impression do we have about kingship in general? Is God, we know Samuel's against it. Is God for it or against it? Except if you look in Deuteronomy, he seems to, we don't have time to go into it specifically, but he seems to be allowing for the possibility of a king in Deuteronomy through Moses.
Okay, but it's not so much that he opposes the kingship. He feels that he's giving Samuel the instruction that you have to explain to them, or you have to list all the cons.
Right.
Such as, you're gonna pay taxes, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that. And you don't, in other words, having a king is taking away not only your responsibilities, but
Right.
your rights.
Right.
freedom.
And your wealth.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, that's the
But
taxes.
they didn't think of that.
Okay, so that,
And then they
so
choose it
you,
anyway.
I appreciate what you've done here, because you've looked at the next set of verses where Samuel is encouraged by God to warn the people what the possible abuses would be, and that's become a sort of a classic, thing in Judaism. That the kings do these things, and but the understanding is this is a warning to them because we're going to go ahead with their idea, and find a king. So Samuel finds well, it's not. I don't think it's quite saying that, but Samuel finds a man that seems to fit certain required attributes of a king, and that's Shaul, that's Saul. In chapter 10, if you want to just peek at this, verse 22, I'm not sure how important the verse is, but it's certainly, you should be aware of it. Chapter 10, verse 22, when Samuel is ready to anoint Saul, and he was singled out in the previous verse. They searched for him, but he was not found. This is verse 21. And then verse 22, they then asked the Lord further, has the man arrived here as yet? And the Lord replies, he is hidden among the baggage. Very strange, very strange.
It must
But-
mean something, but
Whether he was
Among the
hiding, he was
baggage.
feeling insecure, whatever. But generally speaking, the impression we get of Saul, here we just have to summarize because of time. But the impression we get of Saul is that he is a very attractive man he has all the look of a king and of a warrior, and he is a warrior. And he enjoys some success. But we also find that there is developing and has developed a rift between Saul and Samuel. Now, the precipitating event is that there's a battle with the Amalekites, which Saul wins, but rather than impose a cherem, which is a complete and utter destruction of the property and the people that are being captured, he captures them alive and also the property. And that's displeasing, presumably, to God, as Samuel expresses to him. And that becomes the motive for Samuel to find another person to replace Saul. And he finds David.
Because he captured them instead of killing them, is that it?
Yes.
What people were they?
The Amalekites.
Ammonites.
But that's consistent in all of the Tanakh, that God says, bless you.
He probably said that too.
But God tells the leaders what he anticipates, and he specifically says, kill. And do not take even from the sheep or the crops
Right.
or anything.
Right.
Because what God wants to do is get rid of all of the, and anything that can represent another God. Not necessarily evil, which is.
Well, the Amalekites are special.
Is evil.
Amalekites are a special
Amalekites are
case
special,
because
yeah.
they, from the point of view of the Bible, they exhibit an ongoing enmity towards Israel.
I understand
In
that.
addition to that, getting rid of the property, at least, and to some extent, the women and the children, is a way of showing that you're not engaging in this conquest for personal gain, but rather you're doing it as a sacred act, so you're not going to benefit from any of their property. By the way, you'll find the details in chapter 15. We have to move on again because of the time consideration. So we want to get to David. Now, there's a kind of overlap here between the end of Saul's career and the beginning of David's. David really comes into the picture, at the time that Samuel discovers him. And there's a really very touching account of that, which is, I think, in chapter 16. Let's just see if we can spot this, and we'll even read it very quickly. Oh, actually, it must be before that. Sorry.
And he's reading over Saul in 16.
Yeah. So it's before that. Let me see if I can find it.
He's a Philistine for the first minute. That's before.
I'll just describe it. Samuel goes to David's family in Bethlehem. And he's told by God to go to the family of Yishai, Jesse, in Bethlehem. Jesse has several sons. David is the youngest. But first, when Samuel comes there, he sees the eldest son. And this son is another one of these physical specimens that looks like a king. So Samuel immediately assumes this is the one that God needs for him to select. God tells him, no, that's not the one. And he's told to ask Jesse to meet his youngest son. And Jesse was prepared to present his sons to Samuel for the possible selection as a leader. And Jesse has all of them there except for David, because David being the youngest, and perhaps the one least likely to be chosen, he just assumes that David doesn't have to be present.
It is in chapter 16.
Okay, thanks.
Cinderella.
And so, do you have the verse?
It's, I think, 13. Samuel took the horn of gold. I think it's a little before.
So it'll be before that,
Samuel,
right?
let's just say, are these all of your boys?
Right, that's it.
11.
Thank you. So if you look around there, so eventually David is produced, and Samuel selects David, and he anoints him with a horn of oil, and something is made of the fact that Saul was anointed with some instrument full of oil that was much less stable than a horn is. So there's a suggestion that there was a kind of expectation there. As a matter of fact, some of the additional readings that were included in the material have to do with just that. For example, there's a commentary by the Ramban, by Nachmanides, which I believe all of you have, based on a verse in Genesis where when Jacob is dying, he gives his sons various blessings, and with respect to Judah, which is the tribe that Jesse is from, so Jesse and his children are all from the tribe of Judah, it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, which could be interpreted as meaning rulership will only come from Judah. But of course, Saul was also, was chosen before, and Saul is not from Judah. So he's from Benjamin. So it could be, there's a kind of inconsistency there. But what the Ramban tries to show is that what it really means is that Saul's kingship was intended to be temporary. That's not evident in reading the narrative. And you have to look at little things like how did he anoint Saul, compared to how he anointed David. All of this is sort of interpretation. But the idea comes to us after we've read through the story, is that Saul was sort of not destined to be the permanent leader. Or he was destined, but he didn't live up to it. Depends on, you can see it whichever way you want to see it. In any event, David is anointed, but he doesn't really serve as king yet. He's in the shadows. He's kind of in the background.
How old is he then?
Then I don't know. There's probably some, at least commentary that speculates as to how old he was. But the point is that he's a youth. When he battles, that famous story when he battles Goliath, right? Saul, looks at him and says, "You can't do this. You're too young. And this is an experienced, strong warrior." David says, "No, I can do it. God is with me, and I'll do it." And Saul says, "Okay, well, fine, but you have to wear this protective armor." He's trying to protect him. And David says, "I can't stand wearing all that stuff, even down to the shoes, So he goes in this kind of, depending on how you look at it, trust in God, but that's not so evident in the actual narrative, but just this sense of his own, natural abilities and confidence in himself. And this apparently, while it helps and supports Saul, at the same time, it undermines Saul's peace of mind. Because as David becomes more successful in the, if not the shadows, in the margins of Saul's kingship, he becomes accepted by the people as being superior to Saul. The famous verse, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. If that's what the verse means, that certainly seems to be an example of how that became a byword of the people. That seems to be how the people, accepted it. So that's, roughly sort of the movement of the book. I just want to also commend something else among the materials that you received. If you want to take a look at the maps, I think that would be certainly worthwhile. Essentially, we have 3 maps here. And I find these very interesting, but you do have to remember that they are an earnest attempt to make sense out of the descriptions that we have in the book. We didn't get a map, separately from Samuel. He didn't prepare a map for us. This is made, based upon the book. And sometimes there are apparent contradictions between what you see on the map and what the book says. So you have to be, understanding that there's usually a reason why it was drawn one way, even though it may not be consistent with some other passages that we read. But beginning with the map that is numbered 71 on the lower right corner, you see here how the tribes seem to have been situated. Now, I gave out a colored map, which does much of the same thing. But I did want to show you and emphasize a couple of things here. So we have these sort of thick boundaries which show more or less the extent of the north of the kingdom, which remained a kind of cultural entity unto itself, in some way separated from the south of the kingdom, from Judah. Okay? And you see on this map Jebus at the bottom of Benjamin. Okay,
Yeah.
that's presumably Jerusalem. That's what it was called before David conquered it. So this is between the 12th and the 11th centuries. This is before David actually became the ascendant king. If you look
Right above the H.
Right, if you look above Judah, you
Right,
see
the H.
the tribe of Benjamin.
Yeah.
Territory
Oh, I
of
see it.
Benjamin. And at the bottom,
Yes,
you'll
I
see
see.
Jebus.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. And then if you look a little bit further up, you'll see Shiloh, that's situated in the middle but the right area of Ephraim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's where the temple was. That was the temple of its time. Before the temple was in Jerusalem, there was a place in Shiloh, and that's apparently where Samuel spent his formative years. Let's see, what else should we note here? I'm also looking at the outline that you received, which has a number of map places listed. Just turn to that. Ramah is listed there. Now, Ramah is not shown on this map, but it is shown on, I believe it's shown on the map on the other side of the page, on map number 90.
Other
I
side.
hope it's shown there. I know I found it somewhere. But anyway, Ramah is the apparent birthplace and home of Samuel. That's its significance. So,
That's interesting.
yes, it's on that other map. It's on map number 90. If you look at the legend Benjamin, which is a little bit lower than the center of the page, right under the word Benjamin, you'll see Ramah. This is map number 90. You'll see Ramah. Okay? So that's where Samuel came from. And you'll get a sense of how far that is from the future Jerusalem. And on that map, I think Shiloh is not shown. So it's unfortunate, because I would like you to see the relationship of Ramah to Shiloh, because Samuel went from Ramah to Shiloh. And when someone mentioned that maybe his mom didn't have much contact with him after he went to Shiloh, that might be one reason. Sorry? Not everybody has a map?
No, we don't have 91.
You don't have 90?
Our back is not.
Okay. Yeah, that was another problem. That sometimes the backs of pages didn't get printed. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
I will make sure that the maps are up, and I will also put them up online if you want to download them.
Yes,
All right. Now, also on the list of map places, this is on the first page of your outline. We have Har Gilboa listed. Okay, Mount Gilboa. This is in the territory of Manasseh, and it also is not on map 71. It happens to be on map 90. But it's below, somewhat below, south of Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is on your map. So if you kind of pull down from that, see where Beit Sha'an is? Beth Sha'an? If you look at my map, see roughly where my finger is. This is map 71, so I think it's a map that you do have. Mm-hmm. All right. So Mount Gilboa is sort of west of Beit Sha'an. Okay. And
I got it.
That is the place where King Saul and his sons died in their last battle with the Philistines. So I suppose that's the reason why they listed it here. All right. Anyway, that's just a brief look at the maps. And there's also an outline of all 31 chapters of Shmuel Aleph. So I do want to tell you, if you see the outline and there's nothing on the back, you're not missing anything, because it's only one page. Okay, and finally, and I really think this is very, very valuable, and here there should be two sides, is the cast list, C-A-S-T, cast list, because it's a
No, there
very
is
well
none
done
on the
chart.
back.
Okay, there should be, it's two sides, because it shows you all the characters, gives you a summary of each of them, because I'm telling you this because it'll help you fill in what we didn't have time to cover in
We
class.
don't have,
And-
okay, so
and we'll
I
move
know.
to-
We have a cast list for
But-
Olive and Bet.
But only one side. It
It's only
doesn't
one
have.
We have a
Yeah,
second
the ca-
page,
the-
and maybe the second page.
No.
No,
Your
it's
second
different.
page, that's it.
We have a second.
So apparently, some people got both sides, some people did not get both sides,
No.
okay? So you're
Alright, I will bring
you're due both sides. And this
I
cast
will
list,
upload them into the folder and I will also make copies for next week.
this cast list does cover both books of Shmuel, Aleph and Bet. However, they show you, and you can see this even if you have just one page, under sources, they show you with Roman numerals 1 or 2, which chapter it comes from, and which book it comes from. That's either Shmuel Aleph, that's Roman numeral 1, Shmuel Bet, that's Roman numeral 2. It shows you chapters and verses.
Oh, that's good.
So you'll see that almost all these characters are found in Shmuel Aleph. There are a few of them that are only in Shmuel Bet. That's to be understood, to be expected, I mean. But I just want you to know the outline about the characters is very, very useful. So I really commend that to you. And that's about it. I can stay around for another few minutes before I go to my next class. If you want to ask any questions or make any comments, keep them brief so that everybody gets a chance.
Just a
Yes.
question about David's youth, because now so far in class it was, he's so young and all those brothers were older, but in terms of longevity and in terms of the younger generation, it's possible, I'm just wondering if in fact his youth was something that was a distinct advantage in terms, again, of longevity and generationally.
Right.
You mean like Elizabeth?
But I think that's a fair reflection. But whatever the reality was, what we have here is the story of someone developing a reputation, a skill, a place. And we didn't even talk about his relationship to one of Saul's sons, Jonathan.
No, he was close, right.
You know, and he became, a person whom Saul's own son probably at some point preferred over his father, arguably, possibly. So all of this is more that overlap doesn't do justice to what this is. But this is so there's no way that we could even begin today to explore this. But this deserves a study by itself. The relationship of David to Saul and Saul's family, and what that means, and I resist some of the quick judgments about Saul, because he was living in a very complex environment. Maybe he had some emotional problems. This is implied strongly by the Bible that he had, attacks, emotional attacks of sadness and fear and paranoia, depression. But he was living in a very complex political and familial situation.
Daughters and sons, you say, of course, probably just living next year.
That's a great idea.
It's a good
Yeah.
idea, and I will definitely take it in
I
there.
think that
We have
would be
I think that would be more about,
Okay.
Michal is mentioned in 1 Samuel, but I think it'd be more, I think she's mentioned in 1 Samuel, but anyway, there's more about his children in 2 Samuel as well, and so that's something we want to look at next week.
Okay.